Great. So welcome everybody. My name's Colin, and we're excited to kick off this Economy of Francesco webinar series on the Economy of Francesco on Life seminars. And so moving towards a post-COVID better world, this series is organized by the Scientific Committee, meant to explore some of the themes and challenges of today's economy. Although we were not able to gather in person in Assisi this past month, we're grateful to have the chance to convene virtually to discuss the themes dear to us, such as work and care, which we'll be focusing on today, and to really kind of launch a discernment process of how we creatively build new economic structures that respect the planet and human dignity. And so with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Professor Luigino Bruni, who will give us a bit of an intro, and then we're grateful to have Jennifer Nedelsky and Suor Alessandra Smeridi, who will continue after that. So welcome everyone, and I think one other thing I'll share before I turn it over is we'll have a presentation, and then we'll have a Q&A afterwards to kind of make this more discussion oriented. And so those who are on the Zoom, you can add questions in the Zoom chat. Those who are on the YouTube live stream, you should be able to add questions on the YouTube live stream. And then we'll take those questions and group them and ask them. So without further ado, here's Professor Luigino Bruni, philosopher and professor of political economy and president of the Scientific Committee of the Economy of Francesco.
Yes, thank you, philosopher. Is too much. I think economist is enough, but thank you for this presentation. But thank you very much to everybody in Zoom or YouTube. Thank you, Colin. Thank you, Giorgio, for organizing Alessandra at the Village of Work and Care. And thank you, of course, very warmly to Jennifer Nedelsky. Jennifer is now a really friend of what we are doing in Italy and in Europe in the last few years. We met the first time a few years ago now with Jennifer. After that, we never stopped to dialogue, to follow what she was doing on care, on work. We invited her in Loppiano a few years ago, in Rome, in Alessandra University and my university. And we are very, very happy that thanks to Zoom technology, we are able to start this series of webinar. Just two words before listening Jennifer Nedelsky. Maybe I will also say something on her, even though it's in the presentation, also in the leaflet we prepared. But we are also part of this Settimana Mondonito, United World Week, that is this international event starting today, involving hundreds of initiatives all over the world with the aim of to increase the unity among culture, among people, among religions all over the world. That's organized by the Focolare movement. Today, this is one of the first events of the week, and then we are also happy to join in this huge initiative of young people that are also partner of the Economy of Francesco. But why we think that work and care, the issues, the topics of Jennifer are very important in this COVID era? Because what we, for many reasons, because Jennifer is working on care, on this really innovative idea, important, really inspiring idea of part-time work for all, part-time care for all. It is not something new or something for this moment, because Jennifer is working since maybe more than 10 years. I don't know the starting point, but probably many years. Surely many years, probably more than 10. But now, what we really discovered in this crisis, this global pandemic, is how care and work are really linked together much more than we thought before. Everybody working at home during these days, everybody living for now in Italy, we are 2 months in lockdown, a very strict lockdown, and to manage family, kids, work, shopping for food, beverage. We rediscovered the domestic economy, the oikos nomos. Then the political economy became the domestic economy. That was the original etymology in Greek. The importance, how difficult, how important is to run a family, the economy, oikos nomos, the laws, the rules of the house, the household. And then is impossible. Now we see in these 2 months that it's impossible to separate work from care. And then the ability, the competence of care is part of the competence of work and vice versa. And then what we think, for that reason, we choose as a title of one of the 12 villages of Economy of Francesco, work and care together. Because I think it's impossible today to imagine in a serious way sustainable, possible work without thinking immediately, simultaneously to a sustainable and possible universal care for everybody. Then Jennifer Nedelsky, professor of philosophy, political philosophy in Canada, in Toronto, one of the leading figure in this philosophical reflection on the politics of care and work. She wrote papers, books on that, is one of the reference points in this debate. Probably the philosopher who is proposing the more radical and really innovative proposal from that perspective. Then I stop here. I don't know if you have to pass the word again to Colin, to Alessandra, to Giorgio. We are a lot of chairs here, or maybe directly to Jennifer. Tell me who is the moment.
Yeah, I'll do just a short intro of Jennifer and Sir Alessandra.
Yes.
So yeah, Sir Alessandra will be joining Jennifer, and Sir Alessandra is a professor at the Auxilium University and head of the Work and Care and Finance and Humanity Villages of the Economy of Francesco, and one of the only women appointed in the Vatican to present on the theme of work and care, highlighting the interdependence between care for one another and care for the planet, and the need to change our norms of work and care. Jennifer Nedelsky is a political theorist and professor of law, currently at Osgoode Hall Law School. She was previously professor of law and political science at the University of Toronto and professor fellow at the Institute for Social Justice. Her teaching and scholarship have been concentrated on feminist theory, legal theory, and comparative constitutionalism. And Professor Nedelsky is currently particularly interested in research connected to organization of care and work, and she's finishing co-authoring a book called A Care Manifesto, Part-Time for All, which today's presentation is based on. And so thank you both for being with us today. I'll turn it over to Jennifer. And again, if questions do come up, just chat them in the YouTube channel, and we'll bring some of those for the discussion as we go on.
Thank you. Happy May Day, everyone. I'm very happy to be part of this exciting project, and I look forward to meeting face-to-face in the future. So today, I want to talk about the way societies organize work, the way they organize care, and the implications for human relationships with each other and with all of creation. Every society has a structure of norms, institutions, laws that organize the way productive work is done and the way that care is provided. That organization of work and care profoundly shapes the kind of relationships people have with one another and with the natural world. As you will hear, my colleague and I argue that norms have to change so that no one does paid work more than 30 hours a week, and everyone does unpaid care at least 22 hours a week. A useful definition of care is, quote, the relationships and activities involved in maintaining people on a daily basis and intergenerationally. We include care for nature and for culture. We believe the embodied work of care teaches people to recognize their fundamental embodiment, and their profound interdependence, not just with each other, but with all of creation. As Pope Francis has said, our body itself establishes us in a direct relationship with the environment and with other living beings. In doing that's the end of that quote, in doing the daily work of care, we connect to our embodied nature and its interdependence. Everyone knows that every human society requires people to work to produce food, clothing, housing, material goods, as well as non-material production such as modern financial transactions, lawmaking, and teaching. At some level, people also know that every society requires care to be provided to children, to the sick, the elderly, the disabled. And of course, in this time of COVID crisis, we are all reminded vividly of the necessity of care. But not only do humans pass through stages that require intense care, but everyone needs the everyday emotional care of attention, sympathy, shared joy, love, and friendship, as well as the daily basics of food, clothing, and shelter. And of course, just as societies have systems for organizing productive work, currently overwhelmingly through some version of the market, they also must have ways of organizing the care that humans need to survive and to flourish. In most societies, a great deal of care is provided by women, not through direct market forces or laws, but through norms that virtually everyone internalizes. These norms generate millions of hours of unpaid labor. Unfortunately, this vital care is not treated with the same respect as work, even though both are essential. The denigration of care spills over to paid care and to all those who do it. Jobs providing care are usually the lowest status with low pay. In almost every society, one finds those doing care jobs, cooking, cleaning, bathing, toileting, looking after the daily needs of children and the elderly. Who does it? Women, immigrants, and members of minorities who are seen as lesser. Both care and those who do it are denigrated. And romanticized stories about how much motherhood is valued do little to provide economic security, respect, or access to high-level decision-making to women who spend their lives providing care. And I should also note that almost everyone who studies care concludes that high-quality care requires skill and attention. The story that care is paid badly, when paid at all, because it requires no skill, is a story to cover up the complex beliefs, norms, and discrimination that sustain this pattern of low pay and low status. The structure of work and of care are interdependent. Whether the problem with work is long hours or not enough jobs, or the increasing prevalence of precarious work, or all of these together, work compared to care remains the source of status, power, and money. Today, I'm going to focus on the care side of our argument. But of course, people cannot devote a great deal more time to care unless the structure of work changes, and unless some basic economic security is provided. In order to truly thrive, societies must learn to value care and to organize work and care in ways that allow for their deepest values to be given effect. So now I turn to some of the problems that arise from the current norms, and then I'll look at what the new norms should be and some of their benefits. So I begin with 3 pressing problems of the current structure of work and care. The first is unsustainable stress on families. With families trying to struggle with the demands of the care families need and work, whether the work problem, as I said, is long hours or not enough income from work, or long hours looking for work, chronic insecurity about work, long hours commuting to work. In North America, this is often referred to as the work-family balance problem, but it is usually addressed in very superficial ways. Suggested minor improvements are in fact urgently needed, such as flexible hours, but they cannot fix the underlying structure of work and care. The aim of our book is to change this pervasive but superficial conversation. The second problem is inequality. There is persistent inequality for women and others who do care work. But this must be seen in its broadest context. As long as the structure of care relies on categories of denigrated people, whether it's race, gender, immigration status, there can never be equality in the society. It's also true that care cannot be equitably distributed or fully revalued in a society structured around inequality, a structure that leaves groups of people at the bottom available to do low-paid and low-status jobs like care. The denigration of care and of the people who do it are mutually reinforcing. So to say it again, equality in society, if you want an equal society, you have to have equitable care, and equitable care requires equality. The third problem is what I call the care policy divide. Most high-level decision makers have had very little direct experience of care because they've always been too busy and important to waste their time on it. They are ignorant about the care that life requires. They are therefore ill-equipped for their jobs. We should no more choose a CEO or elect a government leader who is ignorant of care than we would select someone who has never held a job. This last point about the care policy divide is very important because there are solutions to some parts of women's equality and family stress that would do nothing to address the care policy divide. Wages for housework or adequate pensions for unpaid housewives would not solve the problem of policymakers who are ignorant of care, or the problem of care providers who will never achieve high office. This is also why we think there should be strong norms against division of labor between those who primarily do paid work and those who primarily do unpaid care. Neither families nor societies should be organized around that kind of division of labor. And all this is true even if the gender division were to be greatly shifted. For example, the care policy divide would remain even if a significant number of women became policymakers who are then also too important to do hands-on care. As long as there are two categories of people, whoever they are, those who provide care, paid or unpaid, and those who have the status to become policymakers, care will be denigrated and policymakers will be ignorant. And of course, it is not just policymakers who share the widespread denigration of care that distorts both policymaking and societal values. The revaluation of care requires that everyone provides care in a sustained way so that they will learn what they need to. Another consequence of the pervasive norms that we have now is a strong sense of time scarcity. The constant sense of never enough time is corrosive of generosity. of the ability to enjoy leisure, family, time with friends, and time in nature, as well as time for reflection, whether personal, spiritual, or political. We also think that time scarcity makes people prone to environmentally unsound practices, like driving cars instead of bicycling or taking public transit, not to mention flying, and makes them prone to a sense that they cannot take the time to pay attention to climate change. And of course, time scarcity also generates huge amounts of stress with serious health consequences. The solution we propose is that everyone who is able does paid work part-time, no more than 30 hours a week. We recommend a new form of the norm of a family wage or living wage. In the old days, this meant that a man could support himself and his family on 40 hours a week. The new norm would be that employers pay wages that allow a person to support herself and a child on 30 hours a week. This is a similar calculus to the old living wage, and I would note that capitalism did just fine under it. The norm for care is that everyone who is able does unpaid care, a minimum of 22 hours a week. We have accommodations in our project for people who periodically have to do intense work, such as lawyers on a big case, international aid workers who have to take time off from their care responsibilities for weeks or even months. But that intense period is then to be followed by time off work to make up the care time. The key here is that one's care obligations do not follow the arc of an individual life. Intense when children are little or parents are aging and frail, and vastly reduced at other times. In our model, when the demands of one's immediate family and friends recede, one contributes care in one's chosen community of care, which might be a neighborhood or a place of worship, or a chosen group like a choir or sports league. These commitments to care must be serious, enduring, and mutual, though not, of course, organized around quid pro quo exchange. At the most general level, everyone needs to care so that everyone can learn in an embodied, sustained way what the demands of care are, what its satisfactions are, and how care builds and sustains the relationships that matter most in life. Learning these things is essential to overcoming the pervasive denigration of care. I would note here another set of deep presumptions tied to the denigration of care. The Western tradition of moral and political thought has juxtaposed freedom to necessity. Freedom is where all the highest human values of creativity, heroism, even spirituality reside. Care falls into the realm of necessity. It is what is to be avoided, handed off to the lesser others who are without the highest capacities that freedom brings forth. Historically, slaves, women, the working class, lesser races, and nationalities. When everyone provides care regularly, we believe that people will learn that one of the most important ways humans exercise their freedom is how they nurture and develop their relationships. Central to our quality of life are the relationships that matter to us, and whether we behave so that the relationships thrive and nurture us in return. The embodied practice of care will also teach that those relationships extend to the natural world. Our care for the natural world, like our care for humans we love, is not just a matter of recognizing that we are dependent on that natural world, but that our love, appreciation, and respect for it grows out of recognition of its own inherent value. Policymakers, voters, and ordinary citizens who are ignorant of the core connection between relationships and care are doomed to make poor choices. We believe societies must end the division between those who provide the care necessary for people, the planet, and the culture, on the one hand, and those who are seen as important policymakers and thus too important to waste time on the care of daily maintenance. Only getting rid of this division can bring the transformation in the value of care and the knowledge brought by care to both policymakers and the general population. While the norms of part-time for all are directed at human-to-human relationships, it is our hope, and we think reasonable expectation, that the transformation brought about by everyone engaging in sustained care and the reduction in time scarcity will also yield a deeper sense that human interdependence far exceeds human-to-human relationship. I want to close this part by saying that we are all embodied and embedded in a complex ecology we barely understand. And the well-being and moral legitimacy of human relational structures depends on a sustainable, respectful relationship with the rest of the natural world. But I think the reverse is true also. If people aim to bring respectful care to nature and to culture without attending to how daily care for people gets done, then that effort at transformation is likely to be based on abstractions and is unlikely to be either equitable or sustainable. Historically, people with good ideas have done a lot of harm when they are disconnected from care. Having everyone engaged in and learning from the daily practices of care is a foundation for transforming all of our relationships. Now, I want to add just a bit more sort of COVID reflections. I've seen my own isolation during this period as a kind of pause for thinking about my priorities. And in these days of the COVID crisis, I have found myself returning over and over to the concluding points I just made about care for the earth. At the most basic level, I believe that the denigration of care is connected to disregard for care for the earth. And if we cannot transform our relationship to the natural world from one based on extraction, exploitation, and the priority of human preferences, then we will destroy our planet. And no other kind of reform, however important, will matter very much. The deepening of this awareness in these last months had made me think that the book needs to take care for the earth and make it a much clearer priority than it is in the current draft. I think that a stance of care, a disposition toward care, is vital. And it is not always present, even in the approaches of serious environmentalists. It is not enough to think strategically about the use of resources and to be creative about alternative ways of generating energy, although that is important. As long as we imagine the earth to be fundamentally a resource for the use of humans and not part of a wider creation of interdependent plants, animals, soil, rocks, each with its own value, its own spark of the divine, we will not be able to bring a relation of care to the earth. And without that, I do not see how we will be able to make the necessary fundamental changes in how we think, how we live, how we organize our societies. This in turn has highlighted a new demand that I think the project needs to make. Just as we have said that everyone needs to contribute care for their fellow human beings, I think we now need to also argue that everyone needs to participate in direct care for the earth. And for the same basic reasons: knowledge about the nature of care and the cared for, building a core caring relationship with the earth, and ensuring that everyone shares in the burdens and benefits of care. I should note that I sent out an email about this to about 40 friends and colleagues, and I received lots of interesting suggestions about how people who live in cities can participate in direct care for the earth. So let me close with an anxiety that these reflections have generated. In the book, we make clear that activism and community participation is very important, but it is not a substitute for direct care. Just because someone does very important work for Oxfam or Greenpeace does not mean they don't need to wash their own dishes or look after their children or work in a community garden. The anxiety that arose for me was that given the urgency of the crisis around climate change, shouldn't we make an exception for those who want to work long hours, paid or unpaid, to get the necessary policy changes or plan important conferences, and don't want to interrupt that work with care responsibilities? I'm happy to say that overwhelmingly my friends and colleagues responded to my email by affirming my original position. No exceptions. I am confirmed in my view, if still a bit anxious, that a caring relationship to the earth is required, and that it is the practice of care that generates and sustains caring relationships. The deep transformations that are necessary require caring relationships with the earth, not just bright ideas or hard work. So thank you very much for your attention. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Jennifer. It was very inspiring. I'm reading comments, and so I think I'm not going to add
a lot of comments.
Yes, comments and questions. So because in the spirit of Economy of Francesco, we should leave the floor to young people and they will interact now with you. I'm going just to say something. It's just an idea, because many people are connected now through internet and through YouTube, and we can make just a little commitment. And I'm taking something you were saying lots of times before. When we meet a person for the first time, it should be nice not to ask what's your job, but who are you taking care of? If everyone will start to do that, maybe social norms can slightly change. But I leave the floor to Georgia because we have lots of questions.
Yes, thank you, Jennifer. This was very inspiring. And again, I want to leave space to the questions of all my young people from the village. A couple things that weren't mentioned that I think are very important are, first of all, that something we believe in the work and care village is that we have to live what we promote. So you're a perfect example because you actually did that. You not only are putting your book out there and promoting this model, but you've done it yourself. And that your proposal also allows for short-term intensity, meaning that it's not like we have to take care all the time. So for example, if I have to hand in my PhD thesis, or right now I have to help in my company, I can. But in general, it doesn't have to be my routine where I'm always under this intensity. So that I think is important. And something else is that when you say also helping the environment, it's putting the person first. When we say putting the person first, it also starts from yourself. Like you have to have self-love also if you want to love others and be attentive to others. And something, because as Damagno always says, it takes more charity to ask sometimes than to give. So, we need to also let it out and tell people that we need help or that we can't make it. And I think the society has been not taking that exact role. And something important that Professor Bruni was saying the other day, and which Professor Smerilli just mentioned, is work has become people's identity, and it's not who you are. So who you are, so something Professor Bruni was saying is that Pope Francis, every time he used to talk to him, would always call him Professor Bruni, because that's his role in Economy of Francesco, obviously. And since COVID struck, basically, he started calling him Luigino, which I think says it all, because we need Luigino and we need Giorgia and we need Colin and we need Beatrice and we need the people out there. And it doesn't matter who you are. As you were saying, they were denigrated, and suddenly, if you don't have a care person next to you, you're dying alone. And it's their love that'll make a difference. And you were saying the same thing yesterday. you know, you gave so much to your students and they like to go grocery shopping for you because, you know, there's a feeling there and they do it out of gratuity, and that's how it comes out. So I want to so these were just my points, because sometimes we are aware of what's going on, but then for the paradox of happiness, we don't maximize it, even though it would be very straightforward. So I'm going to ask a couple people to unmute themselves, and then Colin and I will just put some questions together for you. Bethany, can we unmute her? Can she ask her question directly? Maybe
yes,
put her
sure. Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity. The question is about smart working nowadays, and that's it. How can people balance between work, home, and care about both themselves and their families in the same place? Can this risk to compromise these two realities?
And can we unmute Melissa too, so she can ask directly, and then she can start answering, and then I'll get to the questions in the chat.
I don't know if for Jennifer smart work is enough clear, because probably it's an Italian expression in English. Can you understand smart working? What?
Yeah, but by distance, right? Through, is that what you mean?
Yes, at home, people working at home. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Can someone unmute Melissa?
Because in Italy we often use English expression that English people or English people don't use. This is typical of Italians.
Thank you. So we also have some questions about the structures now. Maybe just to read out loud, Jennifer, do you believe this crisis will truly change organizational and sustainability strategies in companies, their decision-making and innovation processes, or will we experience COVID washing, like not caring at all what's going to go next?
So from greenwashing to COVID washing, I think that might be a problem that we're going to have. I'm going to let you answer these, and then there were so many questions in the chat. We're going to try to make a summary for you.
Okay, thank you very much. So the smart working, of course, this did predate COVID. Lots of women have moved to working at home, but this is not necessarily good for them for the reasons that are now way more obvious. Because if you're trying to balance childcare and work in the same space, one author called it fractured time. You know, there's never a time when not 4 or 5 things are being demanded of you, and this is a very stressful thing. So I think right now some of the calls in North America from people who care about care is that employers should start reducing their expectations, their work hour expectations. Now, this is a COVID-focused thing, but it's forced by a recognition that their workers are also carers, which is always true. So in some ways, this merges into the second question, but I will come back to the issue of care for yourself that Georgia raised. I have very mixed levels of optimism about how much is going to change after COVID. I should say the part of my fear is about fear, that this has made everyone scared. The economy is going to be in trouble. And when people are scared, they do not act rationally or generously. And so that worries me about the capacity of the culture to learn what it actually needs to learn from this phenomenon, which is the ever-present requirements of care and the way in which work has always impinged on it, and it has impinged on work. So I do hope that this book will go to the publisher by the end of the summer and will be out next year, and so it will be arriving while people are still thinking about this. And I hope that suddenly the idea, well, you could just do this, you could just reduce the work hours, not just for COVID, but more generally, will take hold after what people have learned from COVID. in terms of how companies make decisions and so on, you know, I don't actually see much right now, not much turning to asking workers to directly participate in the decision making about how to restructure things. There are some strikes going on in North America right now. So demands from workers who have been underpaid and overworked, you know, places like Amazon, maybe people will pay attention, but my own best hope is not so much, I'm sad to say, in the structures of decision-making in corporations, but maybe a recognition about what happens to our elderly, how we treat our care workers, because suddenly now people are announcing our recognition even of janitors. Though I will say, somebody made an interesting point the other day on a talk I was listening to, that while every day we hear call outs to all the work done by janitors, nurses, doctors, caregivers, so far in North America, we don't hear much about the incredible demands on mothers, especially single mothers, that this situation has generated. But I have some hope that maybe this will transform things. Okay, maybe I'll come back to the self-care thing and connect it to other questions.
Yeah, well, one point on policies was also, what obstacles do you think you would face? Because now we had this conversation yesterday, they are trying to make this paid so that, for example, you can get something in exchange for your volunteer work, but then, you know, we're scared about making that an incentive. And then there's a whole issue, both organizational and personal, about the change in mindset. Like, how do you shift it in a company from the bottom? And how do you get out of this individualistic mindset we've kind of gotten into? Because, for example, Professor Bruni always says that there should be more social reprimand. And I know that you write that if we can push so that it becomes really who you are, and like everybody else, when you throw a piece of paper on the floor, looks at you badly, that works. But then how do you cross the line? Because I know that I've dragged Professor Bruni out of a bar because he told them that they didn't make good coffee and that was not vocational. So I mean, like, how do you not cross that line? And yeah, and another question was about vocation, because something that we've noticed is that all the doctors and everything, people that have died, nurses, they had a vocation to be there because they knew that they were getting in there without the right equipment, without the right stuff, but they still really cared for people more than their actual families who had abandoned them in like an old care home. So then maybe we have to consider vocation and work a lot more than we did before. And there was another question. Oh yeah, and then another point that was pulled up was the importance of the third sector. I don't know if we call that in English, like all the OMGs and all the support.
Third sector, yes. Can I add just one note to this vocation, Georgia, to Jennifer? Because there is a common understanding, a common idea that if you work in vocational sector, like doctor or maybe teachers, I don't know, you require more than 30 hours a week for your vocation, because the vocation seems to embody more than part-time. What do you think about that?
Okay, thank you. That helps me. So maybe we'll come back to the third sector. Not sure I understood that. Did you mean NGOs? For third sector?
This
non-profit in general.
Non-profit. So another version of vocational work. Is that right? Yeah. So I think my first answer is that what I hope is that everybody comes to feel that care is their vocation. Different kinds of care, friends, family, environment, people will choose to enact that care responsibility differently. But just like most mothers of young children who are not in war zones or, you know, otherwise incapacitated, their first priority, no matter what their job is their young children. And it feels like a vocation. And so, but right now we organize our lives so that those of us who get to do vocational work and have families feel torn all the time. It's a story of every young woman, and I'm so sorry to say that, you know, I see the young women academics who've come after me. Things are not getting better for them. Things are getting worse. The demands, the expectations are going up and up and up. And so I think we need to see that our vocation, our commitment to the world, it always takes particular forms, but it just cannot be for what we call work only. But as long as that's the valued vocation, whether it's a spiritual, you're the priest, or whatever it is, I actually think this language, even though it's not, I think in professional worlds, they don't use the language of vocation exactly. It's more about excellence. That's the big thing. But it's a justification for completely unreasonable demands and expectations.
Of plural identity or multidimensional identity of people,
Yes.
not just work.
Yes.
Work is
Yes.
not enough.
Yeah.
And do you want to ask a question, or is there something else in the chat we didn't cover?
Yeah, one that came up was just on your universal basic income, and are there areas, of course it's being talked about, there's some tests that have been run in different places, Jennifer. Are there areas where you see hope or a sign of this actually coming into a policy that you know, becomes enacted statewide, countrywide, and perhaps eventually globally?
Yes. So, you know, it's 10 years ago, it was a very marginal idea, although very seriously advocated by a small group of people. Now it's much more widely recognized. Ontario had a pilot project encompassing 3 towns, and then when there was a change of government, a conservative government came in and canceled it right in the middle. You know, I think it's on people's horizon, and I hear and more in the context of COVID about what is the best way to support people, knowing that their circumstances shift and change. People are talking about it more. I should say that this is my co-author, Tom Mallison, who's the political economist on the team, and it's his job to write the chapters about why this is all feasible right now. He has written those. He is a little less enthusiastic about basic income as a political strategy. He thinks that for the poor, what is going to make things better for them to bring greater economic security is a greater investment in social infrastructure. So that if public health, public education, including university education, public transport, if all of that, including childcare, elder care, if the public investment in that went way up. So for our project, that would have the additional benefit that the living wage could go down, right? That if all of these services were provided publicly, then what every employer has to pay individually for a person to live decently is less demanding. But more importantly, he thinks we're more likely to make some headway there, because when basic income comes in the beginning, it's going to come in at, welfare levels. It's going to be barely enough to live on. It's not actually going to provide real economic security. So I don't know, I'm a little ambivalent about this, and in the book, we're going to leave it open. We're going to say what's required is economic security, and different places will find different paths to doing that. I wanted to say one other thing, but then maybe there are more questions, but I didn't quite come back to this issue of care for yourself and the norms about asking for help. So this has been really interesting to me. I have written some in the book about how among the other norms that have to change is our capacity to reveal ourselves as in need. Because people who have been trained to be professional and be competent, it's very hard to express vulnerability and need. But if this care project is going to work, everybody has to learn how to ask for care. And everybody has to also learn what are the proper norms about receiving it graciously and with respect for those who are providing it, whether they are paid caregivers or not. And it's been very interesting to me to watch. First of all, it took us, my husband, I'm 70, he's 75. It took us a little while to take up our students on their kind offers. Though the Ontario recommendation is if you're over 70, you don't go shopping. And then we were worried, well, maybe we shouldn't ask for that many broccolis. Maybe it'll be too heavy to carry home. And then I thought, no, I have to say what I want. And then I have to tell my students to tell me if it's too much. That has to be the deal, is that we're both open about what our needs are, what our limitations are. So it is a miniature training in what these new norms of care would entail.
There was a really cute question, since you closed with this, that said, so can the reduced hours apply to students as well?
Yes. So one of the first presentations I did on this was at McGill University Law School, and there was a very big audience of students, and immediately all the questions were about part-time, because in North America, especially in Canada, it's very hard to go to law school part-time. It's not impossible, but it's hard. And I mean, you have to prove a million different things so I do think that, law schools definitely expect students to be spending way more than 30 hours a week. And it is a real problem. And now I will say that the law schools recognize this in the COVID emergency. They have to recognize that their students are caregivers also, whether for elderly parents or children. They can't just stop everything during COVID and study for their exams. So we went to a pass-fail system and a generosity about extensions, which are all very uncharacteristic of law schools. So I think, that is one of those moments where people recognize these links.
Okay, well, thank you. This was really special for me. And so I don't know if, Alessandra, do you have any wrap-up questions? A wrap-up, something you want to say in the end?
No, I'm just grateful to Jennifer, because you as usual, you are very clear, and I think it was a great moment, and I see that there are still questions coming. So I don't know if we can, as a village, do something later on more focused on some aspects. If you want to help us, Jennifer, we'll be happy to continue this discussion in order to make proposals as village. Our village is called Work and Care. So
I would really like that. I would love to have a kind of Zoom seminar. You can send me some questions in advance, but we can have a conversation. And it's helpful for me to know what are the questions that come to people's minds, what are the suggestions. So I would really be happy to do that.
Yes, can I just add one word about that? Because I think one misunderstanding about universal basic income is that that Jennifer mentioned is that we usually settle this debate within a market alone perspective, when people privately has to buy everything in the market. In such a system, the basic income will have to pay care, welfare services, insurance, and so on. I think in Jennifer's vision, in my understanding, you have to imagine a society where there are the market sector, but there is also the public sector and the community sector, and not just the market. Because also the basic income has to be understood within at least 3 pillars society, and not just market society, as in the US or other very liberal, not liberal, market countries is usually understood this universal basic income. I don't know if I'm wrong, Jennifer, in interpreting your idea.
No, I think that's right. I think it just, I mean, what I find most attractive about basic income is that it's the only way to actually remove the coercion around work that we have come to take for granted. And I always say when people object to this proposal about everybody has to do their 22 hours of care, they interpret that as coercive. Oh, somebody's going to make me, or the norms are going to make me do this, whether I want to or not. And I always say that, well, and do you feel that way about work? I mean, nobody says, well, that's not really my thing. You know, I'm not the kind of person who adapts well to work. But if we had basic income, it would remove the coercion, the core coercion, and that would be a good thing. I just, you know, it's a kind of political strategy which will vary, as you say, depending on the context, whether that is where you want to put your focus for creating some kind of economic security.
Okay, as a closing remark, so again, thank you, Jennifer, and we will be in touch for a smaller focus group with our village team, and obviously people can connect if they like to, and if somebody wants to work with us, we'll find synergies. This was the first of our seminars. Colin had to log off, he had another meeting now, but we will have another two coming up. One will be the 8th of May, and it will be from our Energy and Poverty Village with Vilston Grow. And then we're gonna have a second one, end of May, beginning of June, with Kate Raworth from Oxford University, the Environmental Change Institute, so we can keep this conversation going about care for the earth. So we're very happy you can.
Excuse me, Georgia, there will be also a finance and humanity webinar on the 7th of May. We will update everyone and we'll send notice of that.
A lot of initiatives, a lot of life. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Georgia. Thank you, Alessandra. It was a beautiful hour, sort of community moment, even though by Zoom. Grazie, Jennifer.
And happy Labor Day, everyone.
Yeah.
Bye.